They've been watching you. No, not casually, not the way people scroll past strangers. They've been studying you, dissecting every move you make like you're a puzzle they're desperate to solve. And here's the part that's going to hit you right in the chest. They documented everything, every word, every pattern, every moment they thought revealed something about who you really are. Someone just exposed it all. Yeah, the evidence is out there now, floating in screenshots nobody was supposed to see. Messages that were locked behind passwords and promises of secrecy, now bleeding across screens like confessions they can't take back. The vault cracked open, and everything they said when they thought you'd never know is staring back at the world in cold, permanent text. You felt it, didn't you? The way certain faces went blank when you entered a space. The way laughter died mid-sentence when your name dropped into conversation. The way people suddenly found their phones fascinating whenever you got too close to the truth. You told yourself you were imagining things, being paranoid, reading too much into harmless behavior. But your body knew what your mind tried to deny. They were building something behind your back. They had entire conversations about you. Not just passing comments or casual observations, full investigations. They theorized about your decisions like detectives working a cold case. They made predictions about when you'd finally collapse under weight you didn't even know they were adding. They placed actual bets on your breaking point, on how long you could sustain what you were building before it all came crashing down. And through it all, you just kept going. You kept creating, kept evolving, kept becoming something their small frameworks couldn't contain. And that unpredictability made them lose their minds. The proof doesn't lie, does it? You've either seen the messages yourself, or you've heard whispers about what they contain, or maybe you just noticed how the atmosphere shifted overnight. People who never acknowledged you before are suddenly in your mentions with apologies. People who ghosted you for months are suddenly hitting you up like nothing happened. Everyone scrambling to rewrite the story, downplay their involvement, convince you that what you're seeing isn't as bad as it looks. But you know better now. Your instincts were screaming truth the whole time. And now the evidence exists in timestamps that don't forgive. Let me show you what was really happening because you need to understand the full scope. Night after night, they gathered in their digital war room of mediocrity and picked you apart. They studied your content like literary critics. They ridiculed your dreams like they were punchlines. They turned your struggles into their entertainment. The labels came fast and harsh, crazy, obsessive, excessive, insufficient, theatrical, fragile, disconnected from reality. And while they typed these verdicts from the safety of their screens, you were out in the actual world, living, building, transforming into the very thing they were too terrified to even attempt. Your success invalidated every excuse they'd been using to justify their stagnation. Your resilience highlighted every crack in their own foundations. This is the real story, though, and this is where everything gets beautiful. While they wasted energy talking, you invested it in transformation. While they were passing around your stories with sarcastic commentary, you were ascending in silence. While they huddled together predicting your downfall in a chat they believed was bulletproof, you were constructing something so far beyond their reach they couldn't even see the blueprints. They thought they were investigators. They were just witnesses. They thought they controlled how people saw you. You were writing a completely different narrative in a language they'd never learned. And now? Now they're the ones in freefall. Now they're the ones sweating. Now they're the ones staring at their own words, realizing every sentence they typed just became a monument to their own hollowness. Let's dig into what that group chat really was, because this runs deeper than simple gossip. It was ceremony. It was their ritual for feeling significant when everything else made them feel irrelevant. It was how they convinced themselves they had clarity, stability, intelligence that you lacked. Every message was a small injection of false superiority they used to numb the sting of their own paralysis. They couldn't confront you directly, so they built this alternate universe where you were the villain. Because acknowledging you weren't the problem would mean admitting they were. It probably started innocent enough, right? Small observations, tiny jokes, shared confusion about your choices. But it grew. It always grows. Someone crossed a line, and everyone else followed, because that's how pack mentality works when it finds prey. You became their shared enemy, their collective project, the thing that gave their fractured connections purpose. You were the glue holding together relationships that had nothing else binding them. And the most disturbing part? They probably told themselves it came from a place of care. They probably rationalized it as concern, as just trying to understand you, as keeping watch to make sure you were okay. But let's cut through that lie right now. Concern doesn't mock. Concern doesn't screenshot vulnerable moments and turn them into group entertainment. Concern doesn't gamble on someone's mental health. Concern doesn't create inside jokes from someone else's pain. This wasn't care. This was contempt dressed up as curiosity. This was fear wearing the costume of friendship. This was jealousy performing as empathy. They needed to dissect you because they couldn't replicate you. They needed to understand how your mind worked because theirs felt barren in comparison. They needed to predict your movements because watching you operate freely reminded them how trapped they were in their own existence. Here's what's wild, though. They talked about you endlessly, but never to you with any real honesty. All those theories, all those judgments, all those conclusions, and not one of them had the spine to bring any of it to your face. They hid behind encryption and private channels because direct confrontation would demand authenticity, and authenticity would force them to acknowledge they were projecting their own demons onto you. Every attack they launched in that chat was just a confession of what they hated about themselves, written in your name. Every flaw they claimed you possessed was just a reflection of what they refused to see in their own mirror. And here's the knife twist. They didn't just analyze your failures. They obsessed over your victories even more. They examined your achievements like fraud investigators looking for proof of deception. They couldn't accept that you earned anything legitimately, so they invented alternative explanations. Luck, privilege, manipulation, anything except the obvious truth that you worked while they spectated. You built while they criticized. You moved while they stayed frozen in their comfortable circle of judgment, refreshing your profiles like it was a full-time job. You became the protagonist of their entire existence, and they never realized they were just background characters in yours. Then someone leaked it. Someone hit send on those screenshots and released them like a contagion with no cure, and everything shattered. Suddenly, the people who were bold in private are begging in public. Suddenly, everyone who participated in months of psychological dissection is scrambling to control the narrative, minimize their role, create distance from the worst messages. But the internet has a permanent memory. Screenshots are forever. Their words are now immortalized in pixels they can't erase, can't edit, can't justify. You know what's actually happening right now? They're terrified. Not because they got caught gossiping. People gossip constantly. They're terrified because the leak revealed something far worse. It exposed their obsession. It showed that you weren't just a topic. You were their entire content library. You were what they thought about more than their own lives. And now everyone sees it. Now the world knows they spent months, maybe longer, completely fixated on you while you barely registered their existence. The power just inverted so violently they can't even process it. They believed they had control because they had the group chat, the shared jokes, the united front. They believed they held power because they had each other while you stood alone. But the leak proved what they never wanted anyone to discover. You didn't need them. You never did. You were thriving in solitude, while they needed an entire support system just to process the fact that you exist. You lived in their minds without paying rent, while they couldn't buy a single thought in yours. And that reality is now public, locked in, undeniable. Let's talk about whoever leaked it, because this matters. Whoever sent those screenshots into the world, they saw something the others missed. Maybe they developed a conscience. Maybe they got exhausted by the performance. Maybe they realized they were part of something toxic and wanted out. Or maybe, and this is the theory that should haunt them forever, maybe they were loyal to you from the beginning. Maybe they infiltrated that group chat to gather evidence. Maybe they played the long game, waiting for the perfect moment to expose everyone. Maybe they were your inside agent and you didn't even know. And now everyone's paranoid about who else might be watching. The paranoia that Leak created is more devastating than any revenge you could have orchestrated yourself. Now they suspect each other. Now they're rereading old messages, wondering who saved what. Now they're purging conversations and abandoning group chats and sending preemptive apologies to anyone who might have seen the leak. Now they're cannibalizing each other the same way they fed on you, because groups built on betrayal eventually betray themselves. You didn't lift a finger. The leak handled everything. Karma in a digital mask just walked into their world and burned it all down. Let's decode their language, because words carry weight, and what they said reveals everything about them and nothing accurate about you. When they called you intense, they meant you made their shallowness visible. When they said you were too much, they meant they weren't nearly enough. When they labeled you dramatic, they meant your emotional honesty reminded them how numb they'd become. When they claimed you changed, they meant you outgrew them and they couldn't keep pace. Every insult was confession. Every criticism was projection. Every joke was just pain they couldn't process, finding an external target. They probably called you obsessed, right? Obsessed with your vision, your growth, your goals. Meanwhile, they literally maintained a group chat about you for months. They were screenshotting your updates, dissecting your captions, tracking your patterns, commenting on every decision like sports analysts calling a championship game. And somehow you were the obsessed one. The irony is dense enough to build monuments on. They were so consumed by your existence, they created an entire digital space just to contain their feelings about you. But sure, you were the problem. Make that make sense. They attacked your confidence like it was arrogance. They studied your self-assurance like it was pathology. They mocked your self-belief like it was delusion. But here's what they couldn't admit. Your confidence wasn't arrogance. It was just unshakable self-knowledge in a world full of people who barely know themselves. Your self-assurance wasn't a flaw. It was a threat to people who needed you doubting yourself so they could feel better about their own insecurities. Your belief wasn't delusion. It was clarity they couldn't comprehend because they'd never experienced it themselves. When they called you cold, they really meant you stopped being their emotional landfill. When they said you became distant, they really meant you established boundaries they weren't used to respecting. When they claimed you turned into someone unrecognizable, they really meant you stopped performing the version of yourself they found convenient. You stopped shrinking. You stopped apologizing for existing fully. You stopped making yourself smaller so they could feel bigger. and that loss of control felt like abandonment to them, so they reframed your evolution as your dysfunction. Here's the translation guide for that entire chat. After every criticism they made, add the phrase, "and that makes me feel inadequate," and watch everything clarify. You focus too hard on your goals, and that makes me feel inadequate because I have no focus. You're too confident, and that makes me feel inadequate because I'm drowning in self-doubt. You're too independent, and that makes me feel inadequate because I'm addicted to external validation. The entire conversation was never about you. It was always about them. You were just the mirror they couldn't stop staring into, hating what reflected back and blaming the glass. Most people don't understand what group chats like this really are. They're not gossip sessions. They're psychological warfare dressed as friendship. They're collective gaslighting where everyone reinforces everyone else's distorted reality until that distortion feels like objective fact. They needed that chat to preserve their version of events because your actual reality was too threatening. You were succeeding where they'd surrendered. You were healing where they were still bleeding. You were advancing while they stayed locked in cycles they couldn't escape. So they constructed an alternative story where you were the unstable one, the problematic one, the one requiring analysis and containment. They took your strengths and twisted them into weaknesses. They took your growth and repackaged it as chaos. They took your boundaries and relabeled them as coldness. And they did this collectively, validating each other's biases, building an echo chamber where their fiction about you felt more real than your actual truth. That's not friendship. That's a conspiracy theory about a living person. And you were the phenomenon they spent months trying to debunk. The most dangerous part? They probably convinced themselves they were being objective. They probably told each other they were just calling it like they saw it, being real, staying honest. But there's nothing honest about analyzing someone behind their back. There's nothing real about crafting false narratives in private while smiling in public. There's nothing objective about people who need you broken to justify their own brokenness. They weren't seeking truth. They were seeking comfort, and the only comfort available was dragging you down to a level where they didn't feel so far behind. You want to know what they were actually doing? They were trying to understand you using frameworks that don't apply to people who've transcended their level of consciousness. They were trying to decode your moves using logic that only works for people who play safe. They were trying to forecast your future using patterns that only exist in people who repeat their past. You confused them because you didn't fit their models. You frightened them because you shattered their predictions. You threatened them because you proved that everything they believed about limits was just a lie they'd swallowed to avoid the discomfort of expansion. And the tragic part? While they huddled in that chat trying to decode you, you were out here decoding yourself. While they analyzed your every move, you were moving beyond analysis into pure execution. While they debated your potential like it was up for vote, you were manifesting it in real time. They were spectators cosplaying as judges, critics pretending to be allies, observers masquerading as participants. And you were the only one actually in the arena, scarred and exhausted and still standing while they sat in the bleachers with their screenshots and their popcorn and their hollow superiority. Now the screenshots are public. Now the masks are shattered. Now everyone knows what festered in the shadows. And the aftermath is more brutal than anyone predicted because exposure does something chemical to group dynamics. The people in that chat are collapsing inward. Some are apologizing, some are deflecting, some vanish completely, some are positioning themselves as the reasonable ones who never really endorse the worst comments. Some are sacrificing each other to save themselves. And some, the truly audacious ones, are still trying to gaslight you into believing it wasn't serious, wasn't cruel, wasn't deep. But you're doing nothing. Absolutely nothing. And that silence carries more weight than any response ever could. You're not defending yourself because you don't need to. The screenshots speak for themselves. You're not arguing because you've transcended the need to be understood by people who were never trying to understand you. You're not chasing apologies because you know they'd be hollow, performative, motivated by exposure rather than genuine regret. You're just existing, just continuing to build, just moving forward like none of this even registered as a disruption. And that indifference is destroying them more than any confrontation could.